Right then, you bunch of high rock sex bots, in honor of the new Stranger Things teaser trailer that just dropped, I decided to cook up a tutorial inspired by one of the many beautiful looks, color palettes our screens have been graced with since the series started. We're going to take an extra focus in on the skin tone specifically because I know a bunch of you big bunda kind of philiacs struggle when it comes to preserving skin tones. So if you want the complete look development, let me know in the comments and I can cook up a full toots. In the meantime, wiggle your poonies into my one-to-one sessions and get booked in. And without further ado, let's get into this poo. Before I even touch DaVinci, you should know that this footage is available from Blackmagic's website. It's free stock footage, so if you haven't copped it already, go cop that immediately. But when it came to deciding which one of the looks I was going to create from Stranger Things, I had to go pull a few references. So before we touch DaVinci and all of its little nodules and nodules, let's check out some of these references. So I've picked out 4 specifically. There was this one, and you can see that the greens and the cyans outweigh the rest of the color palette. You got hints of other colors coming in like this burst of yellow. We're still figuring a way to protect the skin tones. They don't look as they would look in natural daylight, but then again, this isn't an environment where natural daylight is available. It blends in with the actual scenario and the setting. So this was option number 1. Then there was also this reference that I came across where you can see there's a lot more being done to preserve the skin tones to make them feel in cohesion with this film stock that they've emulated here, hence why we're getting these really rich but still quite muted colors in regards to the cyans, the warmer creams with what feels like a tint of green. Even when you consider these whites, they're not clean white points, there's still some character and color available there, and you've got slightly deeper matted black points and shadow points. So this was option number 2. Then we had this, more of an interior setting where it's warmer, feels more rustic and wooden, and you've got these practical lights in the background to insert that warmth. You've got this large window letting in a burst of daylight, which is obviously lighting. So remember, when you are creating your own lighting scenarios, these are things that you got to figure out. And then you got contrast with the pink tops, the cyan tops, the denim jeans jackets, and then again, the skin tones still feel authentic to the environment, not necessarily natural to just the ethnicity. It all blends in with the environment, which is the key thing to remember here. And then there was this, a combination of a few things that I've already said. We have quite muted tonalities when you consider the blues. They don't feel like they're popping off the screen. They don't feel adversely rich. There's still enough color there for it to not feel boring, even in these warmer tones, but it feels quite muted, which is indicative of creating that sense around the time period that this is set in. And ultimately, I did end up going with this reference as our reference for this tutorial. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you how you could create this with the basic tools and the differences with managing that type of workflow in comparison to the ProWay as always, and how you can speed up your workflow to maybe say 2 to 3 nodes opposed to creating 8 to 12 nodes. So again, this is our shot that we're going to be starting with, and this is our reference. I'm going to place it right next to the shot just so we can go back and forth and see the before and after, but this is the shot that we're going to be working with today. So what I'm going to do is, before I even get into this, I'm going to find a hero frame to work from, something like this. And like I briefly mentioned, this workflow is going to require more nodes in comparison to the Pro workflow, and there's 2 different processes that I'm using within this node tree to create the actual look. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the mundane, long way of creating this look manually inside of DaVinci. So the very first thing that you're going to do, again, is obviously IDT and ODT, and considering this is Blackmagic footage, it's got all of the technical specs on the website in terms of the gamma and all of that good stuff, so you know what your color settings are going to be. We're converting it over to DaVinci wide gamut, and then we're taking the ODT and going from DaVinci wide gamut to Rec 709 2.4, and I do have a LUT that works within the wireframe of Rec 709, so I'm not having to do that conversion post IDT and ODT. So I can just place this here, and that's going to give me the color profile from the Kodak 2383. From there, I've gone ahead and created a linear white balance node, done some exposure work to match the luminance vibe to this, So you can see, even when we're considering the scopes down here, if I just maximize these for a second and just place this here, taking a look at the parade scopes for a second, we are quite close when it comes to our luminance values and parameters, and there's already a similar identity available within the actual scene itself, color wise. So we're just doing a few things in order to get even closer when it comes to the exposure and the white balance to begin with. And then from there, one of the most crucial elements when it comes to creating film looks is contrast work. And you can see I've gone ahead, and instead of tweaking every channel, I am only tweaking the Y channel, and I'll just maximize this so you can see the custom curve in full glory. This is where I kind of landed with my custom curve. I had to identify where that middle gray lived, and then I had to build around that. But if you don't have the tools necessary to help you identify that middle gray, you're going to struggle, and you're just going to start guessing, and then you're going to crush your image, and then you're going to ruin the intentionally set luminance values that your DOP set on set. So yeah, very important stuff. Identify where your middle gray lives, and then you can build your S-curve, custom S-curve around that. From there, I did a little bit of look development just to kind of start injecting a little bit more of the color profile into this shot when you consider these warmer oranges over here that are coming from this light panel, and then you consider this and this in the background and these practicals. And then when you're taking a look at these yellows, trying to get this closer even before we start separating this image, bringing our colors as close as possible before we start to do those tweaks. And within this, all I'm really doing is playing around with the shadows, cleaning up those darker areas, because you can see here, even though these shadows feel quite matted, lifted, they're not completely crushed, you do have certain areas like where the shelf is, or maybe even these refrigerators in the background, and certain areas of like the clothing. There are deeper points, but nothing really feels completely lost. So I'm trying to emulate that within this in our own version and clean up the color cast that we might be acquiring from some of the other work that we're doing. So you can see this look adjustment does a lot to help get those colors in that realm, even though it is just playing around with the shadow wheel. Right, now here's the juicy stuff. So this is going to be method number 1 of how you can try to emulate that Stranger Things look, and specifically do a lot of skin work and preservation. So I've gone ahead and created a layer mixer, and if you know about layer mixers, the bottom node takes precedent before you can even work on the top node. So you have to do your work down here first before you can go ahead and work on the top node. This top node is going to be designated for our background work, whereas the bottom node is going to be for our skin. So if I activate this, you can see what's happening. I've done a good job to capture the skin, but I've also had to manually go in and create a mask around it so it's not infiltrating any of the other areas around the skin before I could actually go ahead and tweak it. And then when I activate the top node, when you consider these two combined, there's a lot of work happening here, specifically the skin, which is what's bringing us closer to this. Taking a look at Steve's skin tones, for example, you can tell that there's still quite a bit of magenta there available. There is a harsh light on the left side of his face, which is washing out that color, but you can still identify what the skin tone would look like, right? And if you can't determine that by the face, the next best area to develop that idea from is going to be his arm. And this is going to show you where his skin tone lives, essentially. So if I flick this over to a vector scope with the skin tone indicator enabled, and I hover over this with my qualifier, you can see that the skin tone still feels perfect to the environment and to the person. It does feel quite muted and washed, but it's still befitting of the environment. And this is what I'm trying to emulate here in our skin node in comparison to what we had before, to what we have post work. And what I'm doing here is first and foremost going in, qualifying it, creating that mask, and then I'm going into my hue versus saturation, and I'm pulling down that red channel as much as needed to get as close to our reference. And it is quite close, even when you consider the tonalities. Our model's skin tone is slightly warmer. You got to remember there's makeup involved as well. There's different lighting constructs. So the face is going to feel slightly warmer, but when you consider some of these highlight points on the forearm, the arm itself, we're very close. Think about the light that we're getting here on his forehead in comparison to the light that we're getting on this hand, the arm, even on the face, even on the bridge of the nose. It feels very similar. And then the skin tone itself, there's a lot more magenta within this skin tone, and this is a conscious choice from the post team. So we're having to inject a little bit more magenta into these areas. Remember, she will be wearing makeup, so her face is going to naturally feel slightly warmer, but you're going to have to go in and control that. And then when it comes to the background node, there's a lot of work happening here to bring it closer to our reference. When you consider these yellow points, the red points, even the blue points, our yellows are starting to get closer to the ones that we have here. Our shades of red are starting to feel a little bit closer to the red that we have in this left corner. And then again, the blues that we have on the denim feel closer to what he's wearing for his working clothes. So there's a lot of work happening to unify this image, but one of the key things that I picked up using this method, and you would have to combine it with another method, is this still feels quite saturated in everything that's happening around her in comparison to this. So when you consider this yellow in comparison to this feels glossier, it feels richer, whereas this feels more matted, it feels slightly pulled back. But if you wanted to bring this yellow closer to the one that we have in our reference, the first thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to create a point for your yellow in your hue versus saturation, and you're going to have to start just drawing this back quite aggressively actually. And then you're going to have to maybe create a stroke there on your hue versus, and you're going to have to maybe inject. So in real time, you just saw that it started to affect other areas. I'm just going to reset that. So if that happens, you're going to have to go in and qualify it if you want more finesse over a specific area. So that's going to be method number one. Probably not going to be the most intuitive method, but it will get you quite close to the ref. So let's go ahead and minimize this and show you method number two. And this is going to be in the form of our parallel mixer. So if I just go ahead and enable that, the very first thing that I'm doing is skin work. So I'm going into my qualifier, I'm capturing as much of the skin as possible, then I'm creating a mask around it to essentially section the image before working on it, and then I'm having to do a little bit of gamma and gain work to add that magenta into it, but strip it back enough so it feels muted, similar to our reference that we have. And then I'm going ahead and doing work on these yellow points, and as I mentioned, you're having to go in, key it out, create mask points, potentially if you can't get a clean key, but this was clean enough for me. So I've gone back, stripped that back as well, and then we're going into the reds to get them closer to the reds that we're seeing here, specifically on the ceiling, the neon lights. This now feels closer to that color, specifically this red and this red to this and this. If you've been able to get to that point, and I've been able to get to that point relatively quickly, I'm just showing you a breakdown of how I actually got there and how you can protect the skin a little bit better. If you can initiate that separation from your white balance point and have a clean canvas to begin with, it's going to be a little bit easier to capture those keys. Whereas if you've gone ahead and done a whole bunch of work in your white balance and your look adjustment, and then you're trying to go in and key, you're going to have infiltration from other colors because of how close they sit together. So it's better to start with a slightly more neutral canvas before you go in and qualify. Then when you do it the way that I've done in this parallel mixer and the layer mixer, it should be easier. Key differences that you're going to have here are parallel mixers are going to blend your choices, whereas the layer mixer, anything you do on this bottom node is not going to be affected by this top node. So for instance, if I just enable and disable this, any of the work that I do on this won't leak into the skin node, whereas with the parallel mixer, it will. So you got to be conscious about the choices that you're making and which method process you're adopting when it comes to creating your looks. But these are going to be the two ways that you're going to go ahead and create a look similar to the one that I've just shown you and be able to protect those skin tones. Remember, when you are qualifying this and trying to determine how much saturation you want to leave in the skin, specifically in correlation to say maybe a reference, the vector scope is probably going to be your best friend. Once you've done all of that, then you can go into your grain and add grain and make it look even more filmic. If you wanted to add a little bit of bloom, I don't necessarily want to add that because even the highlights here, they don't really feel harsh. They still feel nice and soft, even the ones on the face. And I've done a little bit of highlight compression within my exposure. Only thing missing from this, once you get to this point, is grain. Method number three is going to be the ProWay. And essentially, when I say to you, this is done in all of this color work is done in 2 nodes. It is literally as easy as that when it comes to the ProWay. especially when it comes to protecting the skin. Just like anything else, we're gonna create an IDT, then we're gonna create an ODT. The first thing that I did was my exposure work, and then I went ahead and tweaked the white balance to bring it into the realm of our reference. We're starting to introduce some of that green when it comes to the highlights. Just with our white balance, you can see that it's living slightly warmer. It's not going too far, but when you start thinking about some of these highlights on the wall or in the background, you're very subtly injecting that into the environment, which is what I'm hoping for. And then we're just warming this image up a tiny bit, considering this light panel on the wall and considering this refrigerator and these lights in the background. We're getting closer, even thinking about these yellows and the blues, right? This is where we're going to create the look. This node here, this look DNA, you might think so much work has gone into this, but honestly, it was so quick to actually bring it back into the realm of what we needed and that filmic look. Once I enable this, you're going to see a massive change. Look at how much work is happening just within that one node. We're muting a lot of the tones and we're getting even closer to that skin tone. It's incredible how near we've got within this node to this, especially when you start to think about these blues and this warmer brownish amber light in the background, the magentas in the skin, the highlight points in the hand, the face, everything. And it is so quick. And I'm going to show you what I'm doing. So I'm going here and I'm using my Look DNA DCTL. I'm tweaking the nit points to create that depth in the shadow, and then I'm playing around with the undertones to deepen those areas. I'm pulling back a lot of contrast to create that softness and that muted tonality instead of injecting more into it, which is going to create that punch and that glossy feel, which is not what we need for our look development. There's a slight lift when it comes to the highlights and the white points, just to kind of create that sparkle within those areas. But the amazing thing is this: I'm not having to create an IDT and an ODT and then transform that into a Cineon film profile and then add a look after that, or even finding a look that works within a Rec 709 pipeline. Because this is so intuitive and understands your color workflow, I've just gone down here and I've selected the Fuji 3513. The reason I've selected this look opposed to the 2383 is because this is slightly richer, so it's giving me a better starting point when it concerns those colors, and then I can go into these parameters and twist a lot of the tonalities. So if I now enable my curves, I'm not having to designate a specific node to contrast and look adjustment. I'm doing a lot of that work internally, and you can see just taking a look at the actual curve. I've twisted quite a few of these hues, but nothing is breaking, and it's helping me get even closer to that final result. And this is so quick. I'm playing around with the white points, I'm playing around with the highlights and just finding what works well in comparison to our ref. And then I'm tweaking some of the areas in that middle section and the shadow sections, and it's just complementing very, very nice. And the key source of how I'm creating that nice muted tonality within this entire frame is this bleach bypass node. So if I just retract everything that I've done here, we're re-injecting a lot of saturation, and instead of me having to go in and pull back the saturation either within this or creating a specific node for saturation, I'm just lifting my silver contrast maybe by about 20 to 30%, and then again I'm just ever so slightly beginning to inject that bleach bypass, and look at how close we're getting just with those two sliders that we have available. So before, after. And it's actually really terrifying how fucking easy it is to be able to create something like this within a matter of minutes. And then, like I said, you only really need one other node to be able to complement all of this, and that's going to be my color warper. And the color warper within this is crazy good. So if I now blow this up a tiny bit so you can see what I'm actually doing, I've gone ahead and created specific points for certain areas. So think about these blues. These blues aren't the richest blues, but there's still enough tonality there for you to realize that it is the color blue. So I've gone ahead and created a point there, and I've tried to match the hue of it as close as possible. Mine feels like it has a slightly bit more green in there, so if I wanted to tweak that, all I would have to do is take that point and shift it upwards a tiny bit. And if I wanted to take out the saturation, I'm just pulling that slider back, and then we've got even closer. Thinking about this warmer light in the background, I've identified where this hue lives, so then when I am creating a point here, all I'm doing is shifting that and adding a tiny bit more saturation there, so it doesn't feel lifeless. And instead of creating a specific node to capture the skin tones and then create a mask around it and then track that node and make sure there's nothing else popping in and out of the track and that it's picked up every keyframe and that it hasn't dropped frames, I'm going into this color warper, creating a point, and then I'm pulling back some of the saturation, but then I'm also twisting it so it's adding a little bit more magenta into the skin tone. So if I wanted to get even closer, because this still feels slightly bit more orange in comparison to this reference, right? All I'm gonna do is take that point that I've created for this, which is here, and I'm just gonna lift it up a tiny bit towards that magenta, and look at how close that's got to this within a matter of seconds. It's completely up to your taste, but remember, like I said, it needs to be able to match the environment that is provided. It doesn't need to be a one-to-one match. You've got to be able to use your skills to determine what fits, and that's my little kitty you can hear in the background, what fits within your version. And that's what I'm doing for some of the other points when it concerns the red, when it concerns the yellow. Excuse me. And even if you wanted to take that yellow point and pull it back a tiny bit, you could. I'm gonna let my cat exit and then I'll be right back with you in a second. Right, now that I've gone ahead, freshened up my puss and let my cat out the studio, there's 2 additional things that you can do, extra credit things that you can do to bring this look even closer to what we're seeing here. And the very first thing is reducing the amount of sharpness that we have from this digital image to make it feel a little bit more filmic. So if I go ahead and enable this node, you can see this node is just softening everything up without necessarily having to go in and create those dusty glows that you lot always love creating. This feels a lot more professional in its delivery. And the way that I'm doing that is I'm going down into this little tab here called blur. I'm switching over from blur to sharpen. I'm taking this channel, the radius channel, and instead of reducing this, which would increase the sharpness and make her look like she's been going through it, I'm taking it and I'm just lifting it up to around about 54. It doesn't need to go much higher than that, because if it does, then you ain't gonna have nothing to look at. So I'm just taking it to around about there, and it's just softening that digital edge, which makes it feel a lot more filmic in its delivery. Final thing is grain. And if you've been watching a lot of Kazzy's tutorials, you'll realize that the new and improved way to use grain is through that Film Look Creator tool that comes with DaVinci. I believe it comes with a studio version, not too sure if it comes with a free version, but all you're doing is telling it, stop adding your own color information and stop blending any of the fucking looks that you're creating. Don't do none of that. All I want is a little bit of grain, and I'm selecting 35mm grain. So if I now punch in, look at how beautiful that grain is. You can definitely see that on the face, in the highlights, and it just feels natural. And it's as simple as that. Like, I've created this look within literally 2 nodes, and then I've elevated it with a tiny bit of softening and some grain. So if you want to create a look this way, which is going to save you so much time, you're going to go into your look DNA, you're going to develop that look, and you're going to do it in cohesion with the curves so you can see what color identity you're adding into your shot. And then once you're happy with that, all we're doing from there, and don't get me wrong, there's other DCTLs which will make the skin tone process even quicker. But if you still want to have a little bit more flexibility in, say, your other node and be able to affect other areas simultaneously, the only other thing that you're going to have to do is go ahead and use your color warper. And with Resolve 20, the color warper is outstanding to a point where you can take new gen Michael and turn him into OG Michael. If you get it, you get it. As I said before, folks, if you want to take your footage from this to this is how you're going to create that look. But if you want the entire tutorial where I take you through the look development and I show you how to get your colors to look like this, let me know in the comments, and I might create a longer version of this tutorial explaining it in even more depth. Going through it one more time and showing you how quick we actually got there. The very first things that we did were IDT and ODT. From there, you're gonna have to do your exposure work and bring it into the realm of your reference. Then you're gonna take that white balance and start creating a subtle identity. So you've got hints of the characteristics available, that story from the offset. And the magic happens, this look DNA, it does so much just to bring it closer to that world that we're trying to create, the upside down. And then you're gonna take your color warper and you're just gonna tie it together. And your extra credit, if you're goofy like that, is gonna be your softness and your grain. And for me, this feels very close to our Stranger Things reference. So folks, as I said before, if you want the full breakdown of how to actually create this look where I take you through it in depth and show you how to twist those hues to create this look, Let me know in the comments and I can do a full tutorial of my process from A to B so you can do it in real time or mimic it. But the key element that I wanted to focus in this no faff breakdown was how to preserve the skin tones whilst mimicking our Stranger Things reference. So if you enjoy that, hit the like button, drop a comment, share it with your ops, let them know that you got one up on them and that their color grade is not bussing but deserves a cussing because it's shite and they're still using LUTs. You get me? And until the next one, you know how it ends each and every time. Alright, cool. Chef Odd. Peace.